This is the Homestead Journey Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the pursuit of self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability. This is episode number 84 of the Homestead Journey Podcast. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here on the Homestead Journey. My name is Brian Wells. I am coming to you from 3B Farm and Homestead here in beautiful upstate New York. And folks, it has been a great and yet different week here on the Homestead. In fact, I spent several days off of the Homestead this week. So let's jump right on over to this week's Homestead happenings, and I will bring you up to speed with what we've been doing here on 3B Farm and Homestead. So the first part of this weekend was all about garden, trying to get the garden planted. And it's just been that time of the year when the majority of our late spring to early summer garden gets planted. And so this week, I really spent a lot of time getting a lot of my seeds planted in the raised bed garden area. So I use the square foot garden method. For those of you who may be new to the podcast, I have 9 raised beds. And so I would say right now, out of those 9 raised beds, I am probably about 65 to 70% of the way fully planted. And hopefully this week, I will be able to get all of my transplants out there, and we'll have that 100% of the way planted. And then I will be able to move on to my Ruth Stout bed. Early this week, I also did go ahead and cut up my seed potatoes so they would have time to go ahead and scab over. And my plan is to get those planted this week as well. A little bit behind on the potatoes. And quite frankly, I'm a little bit behind on some of the more cold weather crops. So your carrots, some of my brassicas, things like that I could have had in a long time ago. But as you may remember, I was trying to get the raised beds topped off. And so that kind of put me behind a little bit. And then we had some pig problems with regards to pigs getting out of their pens. And so last week, when I normally would have been planting garden, I was running electric fence. And that was actually no different this week. Unfortunately, we had another escape. And that is that Bear, my main boar, actually went over a hog panel to get in with the sow Sage. Now, she's one of the ones that just recently farrowed. Actually, when I say recently farrowed, about 8 weeks ago, she farrowed. And in fact, this week I completed weaning the piglets. And he actually went over the one section where I don't have a hot wire between the two paddocks. Well, I caught him in the act of breeding her. So we'll see whether or not it took. And I've marked down the date, and we'll see whether or not in 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days, we have another batch of piglets, which isn't the end of the world, but isn't exactly what I was planning on. And so I went ahead and ran more hot wire in that area. We did lose a couple more of our meat birds. Our plan is to dress the meat birds off next Sunday. So that would be the Sunday of Memorial Day weekend. And so hopefully we won't lose any more between now and then. And it's just natural causes. They just dropped over dead. The Cornish cross is known to do that. We've not really changed anything with regards to our approach to raising these chickens. And yet we've had more losses this year, and my dad has had more losses this year. And the only thing that we changed is that we got the birds from a different hatchery. And so I think we'll be going back to the other hatchery next year, and we'll see if our losses are lessened as a result. Now, as I mentioned, we actually left the homestead for a few days this weekend. My wife and I did. Our 16-year-old son stayed behind and kind of held down the fort. My mom and dad came down and helped out with some of the chores. And so as a result, in preparation for us leaving, we actually streamlined some of our homesteading processes. And after we got done doing that, I looked at my wife and I said, why haven't we done this before? Why haven't we made some of these changes before and made our lives easier, made our lives more streamlined? And so hopefully we'll be able to keep in place some of those changes that we made, and it will make for a little bit more of a streamlined operation here on the homestead. And some of that simply was putting larger waterers in so we don't have to carry water as many times. Or maybe we can run a hose and fill it up using a hose instead of having to carry buckets of water. Some of it meant putting the feed at the point of use. So carrying out a 50-pound sack one time instead of carrying out pail after pail after pail of feed throughout the week. And so it's just little things like that that we put in place. And hopefully we will be able to keep some of those things going. Sometimes it's just very beneficial to go away because you realize some of the tasks that you've taken upon yourself, and you think that'd be unfair to ask somebody else to do it. And then you ask yourself, well, should I be doing it that way? Can I do it in a way that's more efficient? And usually the answer is yes. And so, as I said, my wife and I did spend a couple of days away from the homestead. It was just very, very needed for both of us. It was just a break that we needed, both as a couple, but also just to get away from some of the things that we've had going on, some of the pressures of life, so to speak. And so, just an opportunity to connect with each other, to rest, relax. It was great. But now I'm back, reinvigorated, ready to go. And so here we are doing the podcast. One other thing that we did on our way to our weekend getaway, because of course I know how to show a lady a good time, that is we loaded up a couple of piglets that are bound for Beardsley Zoo. And if you follow us on Facebook and Instagram, you would have seen a picture of them loaded into a crate. I dropped them off at my buddy Jack's house. He has a boar, and the boar and those two piglets are actually going to be going to Beardsley Zoo, and they will be the breeding stock for their re-entry into a breeding program of American guinea hogs. They actually had a breeding program for a number of years. And in fact, my boar, Bear, came from Beardsley Zoo. So he's actually Beardsley Bear. And so it's an honor and a privilege for me to be sending some of my genetics, which are their genetics, back to them, and to be a part of them re-implementing a breeding program there at Beardsley Zoo. So if you are in the Bridgeport, Connecticut area in the next couple of months, take a stop by Beardsley Zoo, and hopefully at that point they will have the pigs on display. You'll be able to see them. And I'm just so excited and so honored to be a part of that. All right, before we head on over to this week's Charting the Course, I did want to give you a couple of podcast updates. So first of all, if you missed it, I was honored and privileged to be again on the Urban Farm podcast. This past Friday was Farmer Friday, and I was interviewed by Greg for that podcast. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely do so. I'll put a link in the show notes. So thank you, Greg, for letting me be a part of that. Along with that, if you haven't been, definitely keep an eye out for the new series that I launched a couple of weeks ago that I am calling 5-Minute Fridays, paying homage to Greg's Farmer Fridays. In that series, I am trying to deal with a topic in 5 minutes or less. And so on this past week's episode, I actually admonished you to be a quitter. And so if you have any interest in that, you missed that podcast, check it out. It should be in your feed. I will also post a link in the show notes. Finally, for those of you who are a member of the Supporting Listeners program, listen up. This month's live Q&A, and this actually is going to be the first ever live Q&A, will take place this Friday at 8 p.m. So it will be May 28th at 8 p.m. So definitely keep an eye in the Facebook group for the link to that. Also, if you are not yet a member of the Supporting Listeners program and you'd love to be a part of it, you'd love to be a part of the live Q&A and be able to ask me any kind of question, head on over to support.thehomesteadjourney.net for more information and to get signed up. And don't forget, if you use the promo code May10, May10, you will receive 10% off your membership fee. All right, having said all of that, let's head on over to this week's Charting the Course. On today's Charting the Course, we are going to talk about 7 things that you need to realize before relocating to start a homestead. In particular, if you are moving from an urban area to a country type setting, this is going to be important for you. But I really think anytime you relocate from one area to another, so if you're moving from the country of upstate New York to the country of Tennessee, or you're moving from Georgia to Idaho, I think all of these principles, we'll call them, that I'm going to mention, these 7 things, are important for us to realize if we're going to be successful in our relocation. As I was putting this together, I understand how some people may see or may take what I'm going to say as being negative. And I'm sorry if you take it that way. My goal, though, is to just speak the truth as I understand it and help you avoid making mistakes so that you can be successful in relocating if that is what you choose to do. So the first thing you need to realize before relocating your homestead is that as we come into a new community, we are in fact outsiders. People are going to look at us a little bit suspiciously. And that's not always our fault. Sometimes it's due to the track record of other outsiders. A lot of times it was because those people came in and they came in with kind of this loud, brash, braggadocious type attitude that did not jive well with the local community. You are an outsider. You need to understand that. And it is going to take time for you to build up the political capital, those friendships that you need to be accepted as a part of the community. The second thing that you need to understand is that no one cares about how great where you came from is. Now, I understand when you move from point A to point B, there's always going to be a bit of homesickness for where you left. Even if you are excited about where you are going, there are times when you simply miss the things from where you've left. I've been through that a number of times. You know that I used to live in Brazil. There are times when I am greatly homesick for Brazil. You know that I lived in Cincinnati. There are times when I am greatly homesick for Cincinnati, and especially the foods of Cincinnati. I mean, the same thing with Brazil. I just homesick for everything about Brazil, but the foods of Cincinnati, I get very, very homesick for Cincinnati style chili and Grater's ice cream and La Rosa's pizza. And I'm just drooling here thinking about those kinds of things. I miss the people of Cincinnati. I miss some of the activities of Cincinnati. I don't miss city life so much, but there are times when we are homesick for the places that we've left behind. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter how great those places are. When you've relocated to a new place, the people there don't care about that. If they wanted a Starbucks in every corner, they'd move to a place where there's a Starbucks on every corner. If they wanted a place with great nightlife, they would move to a place that had great nightlife. So you sitting there and bemoaning about the lack of great coffee in that area is probably not going to endear yourself to that population. You complaining about a lack of nightlife in that area is probably not going to endear yourself to that. You complaining about a lack of theater, comedy, whatever it is in that area that you miss from where you came from, it's probably not going to endear yourself to the people in that community. If they wanted that, they would move there. And quite frankly, if all of that was so great, then why did you leave in the first place? So again, no one cares about how great where you came from is. The third thing I would say that you need to understand is that you need to leave the city in the city. When you move to the country, or when you move from upstate New York to Tennessee, it's a different culture. It's a different way of life. People maybe move at a little bit of a different pace. But one thing is for sure, people in the country generally do not like to be told what to do. That might fly in the city, but in the country, by and large, people are of the live and let live type mentality. That's the attitude in the country. You do what you want to do. I'll do what I want to do, and we will get along just fine. But a lot of times I see a lot of conflict between outsiders coming into a new community because they try to tell other people how to live their lives. They try to dictate to other people what they can and cannot do on their property, even though those people may have been there for many, many, many generations. And yet you have new people coming in that are trying to dictate to them what they can do, how they can farm, what animals they can raise, how often they can make noise, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Leave the city in the city. The fourth thing that you need to understand, and I say this with all due respect, but that is that you don't know as much as what you think you know. You may have read all the books. You may have read all of Joel Salatin's book, and I'm not picking on Joel Salatin, but you may have read all of the books. You may have watched all of the YouTube videos. You do not know as much as you think you know. I know you're excited about all of this knowledge that you've acquired, and you're excited about putting it into practice. But you're going to run into what I'm going to refer to as conventional guy. Now, it could be conventional gal, but I'm just going to say conventional guy. Conventional guy has been doing a garden for 50 years. It's probably not no-till. He probably uses some kind of chemicals, fertilizers, fungicides, things that you wouldn't necessarily use because of your embrace of sustainable agriculture. He probably does not do rotational grazing. There are a lot of things that conventional guy probably doesn't do. And you're going to be very tempted to do two things. You're either going to be tempted to ignore conventional guy, or you're going to be tempted to change conventional guy. And either one of those is a bad idea. First of all, conventional guy, whether you agree with all of his methods or not, you need him. He has a lot to teach you. Conventional guy, if he's been gardening for 40, 50 years in that area, he's going to know a lot about pest pressure. He's going to know a lot about the nuances of the microclimates in that area. He's going to know when is perhaps a good time to start potatoes and when perhaps is not a good time to start potatoes. He's going to know who to call when you have a problem, and maybe conventional guy is the guy in that area that you call when you have XYZ problem. They know the stuff that the books will never, ever be able to teach you. They know the nuances of that area that Joe Schmo YouTuber will never know. You need conventional guy. So do not ignore what conventional guy has to say. Now, that's not to say that you need to do or take all of the advice that conventional guy has to give you. I'm not suggesting that you throw away all of the ideas that you've learned in Joel Salatin's book or that you've learned from this YouTuber or that YouTuber. That's not what I'm saying at all. But it's a matter of understand that conventional guy has a lot of information to teach you. And you need to go in understanding that you don't know as much as you think you do. The fifth thing that you need to realize is that there are local customs, whether they're food customs, celebrations, mannerisms, whatever, but there are local customs that you need to embrace. When you move to a new area, many times it can be a totally different culture. Now, as you know, I grew up a missionary brat. We moved to Brazil when I was 13 years old. I learned a lot about culture shock in that move. A lot of times we think about culture shock when we move from country to country, but in the United States, we don't think as much about the fact that Georgia might have different customs than upstate New York does. That Tennessee might have a little bit of a different way of doing things than upstate New York does. That Texas has a culture of its own that I don't think anybody but a Texan will ever fully understand. Alaska is much different than Southern California, and I could go on and on and on and on. Every area has its own local customs, its own local foods, its own local mannerisms. And as much as we've tried to make everything vanilla across the United States, the fact is that every area is just a wee bit different than the next. And you better not go into those areas deriding the customs, making fun of the culture, laughing and joking and poking fun at these hicks, because that's not going to do you any solids when you're in the ditch in the middle of the winter. And if you've been making fun of so-and-so down the road, probably so-and-so down the road that's got the big lifted pickup truck is going to drive right on past you and maybe give you the California welcome as you're sitting in the ditch. Where if you would have played nice, if you would have tried to understand and adopt as many of the local customs and cultures as you can without trying to be a fraud, be sensitive to the cultural norms of the area. Because again, remember, you're not wanted. Nobody invited you there. You've come to their place. You've come to their area. It's up to you to fit in, not for them to change to fit you. Another thing to understand when you move to a new area is that as part of local custom, sometimes land access is just kind of assumed to be okay. If you buy a place on the creek, shall we say, the creek, depending on where you come from, people for generations may have been crossing over your land to go down to the local swimming hole. Where my in-laws live, just up the road from them, there's a community swimming hole that people have used for years and years and years that they cross private land to get to. If you bought that private land and were to shut down that access, certainly you would have every legal right to do so. You're probably not going to endear yourself to the local community. You could be dead right, probably not well liked. So just keep in mind that there are local customs, food, celebrations, mannerisms, land access, and usage that comes along with relocating to another area. And sometimes you need to go along to get along, and you need to be the nice guy if you want to be successful. Number 6, change comes slowly, if at all. So going back to conventional guy, as I said earlier, your temptation is going to be to either ignore him or to try to change him. Conventional guy didn't invite you to the area. Conventional guy has been tilling his garden. He's been using Miracle Grow on his tomatoes for years and years and years. He couldn't care less with regards to sustainable agriculture. What he's been doing has worked well for him for 30, 40, 50 years. If you try to change him, trust me when I tell you, it's probably not going to go well. And yet I see this a lot of times. New homesteaders move into an area where conventional agriculture is present, it is widely used, and then they get upset because the farmer who owns the fields that surround their 1 acre of land sprays his corn. He's been spraying his corn long before you got there. And probably you should have asked those questions before you bought that property. My guess is you're not going to change him spraying his corn, at least not right away. And so it's something that you're going to have to deal with. Or else maybe you should have asked those questions. And that's why I'm telling you this stuff, so that you understand maybe some of the questions you should ask before you relocate. But change comes slowly, if at all. And if you come into an area where conventional agriculture is the law of the land, where the CAFOs is the way that people raise cattle, and you start beating your chest about grass-fed and this, that, and the other thing, you may be dead right, but you're probably not going to be well liked. And my guess is you're probably not going to change a whole heck of a lot of hearts and minds. So my advice to you is simply to do you, and to show people how well you can grow vegetables without Miracle-Gro, how well you can raise animals through a rotational grazing system. You're going to have to prove to people how well it works. You're not going to be able to dictate to people, especially people who have been doing this for, in some cases, generations, that all of a sudden this new guy from the city who's never grown as much as a cabbage in his entire life, all of a sudden knows how is the best way to grow corn. It's just not going to happen, folks. So keep that in mind. Change comes slowly, if at all. But the only way that change is going to come is if you win the hearts and minds of people. And so that means that you're going to have to walk the walk, not talk the talk. The final thing you need to realize before relocating to start a homestead is that no one expects you to stick around. Thousands have come and thousands have gone. Many times people have seen this play out over and over again. People have come into the community and then decided it wasn't for them, and they've headed on back to wherever it is that they came from. And so people are going to be a bit guarded. It just is what it is. If you come in with a know-it-all attitude, if you come in with an attitude of superiority, where you're making fun of the local customs, the local mannerisms, the local way of speaking, you come in thinking that you're going to force everybody to do things your way, already they don't expect you to succeed. And so when you understand that nobody expects you to succeed, that nobody expects you to last, you need to do everything in your power to set yourself up for success. And so the first 6 things that we talked about, understand that you are an outsider, that nobody cares how great where you came from is. Nobody has any interest in bringing the city to the country. You certainly don't know as much as what you think you do. You've got to appreciate and embrace the customs and culture of the area in which you live, and that change comes slowly, if at all. When you understand those things, it certainly is going to help you to have a much greater chance of beating the odds and proving them wrong when they don't expect you to succeed from the get-go. Folks, I hope you have found this helpful. Again, 7 things you need to realize before relocating to start a homestead. If you feel like this was very negative, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Reach out to me, Brian@thehomesteadjourney.net. I'd love to have that dialogue with you. If there are other things that maybe you think that people should realize before they relocate to a new area, I'm all ears, and maybe we can do a follow-up episode on this. But I certainly do hope that this is helpful, and it does set you up for success as you take the next right step on your journey towards self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability.
Brian can be reached by emailing him at brian@thehomesteadjourney.net or by contacting him via our social media accounts on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support this podcast, we invite you to become a member of the Supporting Listeners program. For $10 a month or $100 per year, you will receive access to a community of like-minded individuals via a private Facebook group, at least one monthly live Q&A with Brian, the opportunity to participate in live recordings of the podcast, access to an ever-expanding library of helpful homesteading content, and so much more. Head on over to support.thehomesteadjourney.net for more information and to sign up today. As always, the music on this episode was provided by audionautics.com, so a big shout out to them.
And until next time, everybody, keep up the good work.